Lucknow. So, and even some students are, one of the student is from abroad also. She is from Dubai. So, these are the students from, especially second, third, and fourth year students. Uh, and for this valuable guidance from you, we are awaiting. Our students are awaiting. So again, I warmly welcome, and I hand over to Madhu to give formal introduction and go through his strong biodata of architect and ex-principal of our college. Means I have passed out from Pushkar Sir's college, Abhinav Kalam Mahavidyalaya. So I'm an alumni of the same institution from where the Pushkar Sir has retired now, and we would like to go through his presentation and valuable thoughts, which will definitely the students will carry something from this webinar. And with this, I hand over to Madhu, and again I welcome you, sir, and all my students.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Over to Madhu, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So let's get introduced to our guest speaker for today, architect Pushkar Kambinde. He's an architect and urban designer from Pune. For more than 35 years, he is into teaching and practice. He has taught and also headed BKPS College of Architecture, a premier institute that has completed 66 years in architectural education. He is also a visiting teacher at other colleges in In the past, he was selected as to head the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Architecture, that's NIASA, academic unit of Council of Architecture, now rechristened as COA TRC, that's the Council of Architecture Training and Research Cell, as its first director. From 2005 till 2008. He not only established NIASA, but also initiated and established the training programs for teachers and other popular programs like the Thesis Awards program, and most importantly, National Aptitude Test in Architecture, that is NATA. He is also actively involved in practice, and his office has completed almost more than 300 architectural projects and more than 200 interior projects. So a vast experience added to this feature. His designs are highly appreciated for their timeless character by the users and the architects fraternity. He has also received awards in architectural competitions in the past. Pushkar sir is also involved with fellow architect, architect Prasanna Desai, in a unique initiative, the Forum for Exchange and Excellence in Design, that's FEED, since inception in 1999. FEED has till now hosted more than 270 programs for its members, mainly the students of architecture. Sir has contribution to many schools of architecture and universities in India as an advisor, as a member of board of studies, as an evaluator, and many more responsibilities. He has many articles and research papers published in journals of repute to his credit, and has regularly presented research papers and works in many conferences and seminars across India. Recently, he has co-authored a chapter in a book, Tourism and Religion, published by Channel View Publications of United Kingdom. Pushkar sir was awarded the prestigious Best Innovative Teaching Practices Award by the University of Pune in 2011. He is consistently involved in the local architectural scenario in Pune and is currently the Vice President of Architects, Engineers and Surveyors Association, that is AESA Pune, the executive member of Pune Construction Engineering Research Foundation. Our guest for today is a member of Council of Architecture. He is also a chairman of All India Board of Architecture Education at AICTE. He is deeply involved in bringing in reforms to architectural education in India. I would like to also add upon that besides being a thorough academician and a practitioner, Pushkar sir has been a genuine teacher, reaching to the hearts of the students with his simplicity, knowledge, and experience. So we are honored to have you as a guest for today. May I now request our guest speaker, Architect Pushkar Kanmende, to begin with his presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Savan sir. And good morning, all friends. In these difficult times of COVID pandemic, I hope you are all doing well, safe, and trying to learn yourself into architecture through various mediums. I think architecture is one such course where actually teaching is something which is not very important as learning. One is expected to learn himself and learn many things and keep on learning till the time he holds his pencil as an architect and contribute to the well-being of society. So even in architecture colleges, rather than teaching, we are interested in creating a perpetual learner who will keep on learning himself and updating himself forever till the time he wants to practice as an architect. And that's why probably architecture is called practice. So you are never perfect. You are always practicing and trying out new things. And that's how the things go ahead. Now, as far as architectural design is concerned, it's a continuously evolving process and a new challenge every day. A lot of research is required to remain active and creative in architectural design, and many things, new things are tried, the old things are forgotten, and now today it's an effort to rediscover in a way the things that were being practiced till almost 50, 60 years ago, and even today many architects are practicing it. But these tools are often forgotten and often relegated as something out of fashion. But these things never get out of fashion. So today we will try to rediscover some of these tools which are very commonly used by architects. And doing that, first my presentation will be in two parts. First part will be, we will talk about the process of design, what design is all about, and then get into some of the tools. There are many tools available, and I'll be talking about tools, not theories. Theories are many, processes are many. There are, as far as I know, more than 35 processes and theories identified in architecture by people as to how people approach a design. But that is about the theories which lead to the concept. But I am talking about tools. You have a concept, you have the idea of what you want to do, you have the abstraction of the requirements, but then how do you go about actually dealing with the form is something many times the students are not very clear. So this is an effort to tell you that these are the tools available with you, and you should try to explore and go ahead with these tools when it comes to design. So let me start my presentation. Let the slideshow start in a minute. Are you all able to see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. So we can go ahead with this. So we are talking about tools. So first we will speak about what is design. Now in design, or we can simply say architectural design or architecture, it deals with space and materials used to create such space. Now, space could be anything. Even if you put a few stones in an open space to create some kind of a seating, that itself becomes a space. And the materials you have used are some few stones which are arranged in a particular manner so that a group can sit and discuss. So that becomes a discussion space or a meeting room in open. But it needs some materials to do that. So space is built, because we are talking about building, using materials to express abstraction of expectations of the user or architect or both. Expected is both. That is, a user expresses his ideas about what he wants, his requirements to the architect, and architect, listening to the ideas, gets into the abstraction or finds what is the core requirement or what is the stripped of requirement, basic requirement of the client, and then what he expects the space to be to deal with that requirement, and creates that space using a set of materials. This is in reality. In our studios in college, it is a proposal for development of a site usually, or a plot, including a building, because we are dealing with architectural design. In early years, it is either interior or exterior, or by the time you reach fourth year, it is expected that you deal with both interior as well as exterior of the building and its surrounding landscape to satisfy the needs of a space for an imaginary client. For that matter, the teachers act as agents of the client, discuss with you various ideas that you put forth. But in reality, that client is imaginary. Many times in early years, even the site is imaginary. By the time you get into third year, you get into real sites, then you visit the site, find out about it, look at the context, then look at the needs, and come out with a design of space for that client, which is an imaginary client. So that is how we deal with it in our design studios. So therefore, it has two components. One is space, that is the space which is being used for a particular purpose, and container of the space. Now that container together with the space becomes architecture. That container is the building that you built, and that container contains the space to be used for a particular purpose, and therefore together container of the space and space create the architecture. Now that container which makes or molds the space in a particular manner is built with materials. Now when you want to use materials, it needs an arrangement called structure. Now that structure or structural system or this arrangement, how that material could be used to create or encapsulate that space, is because of materials. Like if you imagine a space and use bricks for making that space, then bricks have to be arranged in a particular manner to enclose that space. Instead, if you use, let's say, wooden planks, the arrangement will be much different than bricks. Maybe the space will be similar, but similarity ends with the physical dimensions. The materials give that space a particular character, and that character is something which is expected by the architect for the space. So the container built with materials which call for a particular kind of structural system becomes a very important and integral part of architectural expression of the design that you are proposing. So this design, which is of a container and the space contained within using materials, is based on 2-3 different parameters. The most important is the body of the container, or the materials which are used, like structure and finishes. Then the soul or a purpose, how it looks, what is it is meant for, and whether it satisfies the physical and psychological requirements of the user. That is the soul. Together, body and soul create an expression which is holding the particular function for which that space is designed. So, keeping in mind the expression or a function, you create a system or a purpose or a soul with a particular aesthetics in your mind, using the material which is a particular, giving a particular finish and a structure. So all these 3 parameters coming together create an architectural design. Now this design is based on 4 different influences which are essential to make it a success. First is anatomical, that is, if it is being used by human beings, then it must respect the human anatomy, therefore anthropometry, and be comfortable for the person or persons to use that space. Then there is a geophysical influence, that is, where is it located? What is the climate of the place? What are the local materials available? What is the local living style? And what is expected out of that enclosure to respond to the context? This is a geophysical influence. So that's why the building which is built in maybe Ratnagiri will be different than one built in Kolhapur, which will be different than one built in, say, Sikkim or Shillong, which will be different than something built in Ranchi, because each place has a different geological and geographical context. Same way, the socio-cultural context is also important. So the way people or community behaves, let's say in Maharashtra, is different than the way community behaves in Jharkhand, then a community behaves in maybe Sikkim and maybe Meghalaya. For that matter, even Meghalaya, Arunachal, Assam, even when they are very next to each other, their society and culture is different, the economics is different, and therefore the architectural response or response to design the space or expectations out of space also differ. And lastly, the technological, that is, what is technically feasible to be built using particular materials, also influences the design. So these 4 parameters, the human being who is going to use it, how it will be convenient for him, the place where a structure is being built, the characteristics of that particular location, the society and culture of that place, and economics, of course, and the available technology and materials. All 4 together influence the design. So how the process starts and ends? It starts and ends with logical and physical premise. That is, you start building a logic as to how that particular space should be designed, should be used, how it will be used, what will be the particular traits of the people who are going to use it, what will be the physical requirement that premises. All this is the beginning and end, because it has to finally satisfy the needs of the user, and they are brought together through a process of abstraction, through trying to strip down the unnecessary parts of it and add something which is necessary, and come up with a unique idea which is referred as a concept. Many times this is a big discussion in architectural colleges as to what is a concept, how do you arrive at a concept. So it is actually simply an idea which is the central idea for a particular designer's answer to the given requirement. That is concept. So architectural design therefore becomes a intelligent expression of individual abstractions of totality of its components, bound in functional commitment and limitations of physical properties of space and materials involved. This in short defines how the architectural design comes into being. So it's a expression of the designer, intelligent expression, where he relies on abstraction of the materials being used, the components, the function of the space for which this particular building is being designed, and what are the physical limitations in terms of available space, in terms of the structural system, technology, materials, finances, all together. By abstracting on all that, the architectural design evolves as an expression of that design. Now, this design achieves excellence if the complexities of functions and limitations of space and materials become assets of abstraction. That's what we call appropriate design. That is, when will the design will be considered as an excellent design? When it very intelligently satisfies all the needs of the user in terms of the functionality, the activity being hosted within the given limitation of space, and expresses it as something iconic, something which is pleasant to look at and psychologically satisfying, then it becomes the excellent design. Now, every design has a potential to be excellent, but it stops at one of the shortcomings in terms of maybe the economics, maybe the technology that is available, maybe the expression of that client's need is incomplete, or maybe the understanding of each other's complementary requirements by architect and the client remain incomplete. Only when these conditions come, it stops short of being excellent. Now, process of design is neither purely additive nor subtractive. Now, this is something which most of the students are trying to do. In the first year, you all learn how do you create a bubble diagram. Bubble diagram of where the spaces will be, what is the relation between the different spaces within the building, etc. And then put them together, adding to one another. Now, when you are doing that, many times you forgot or maybe don't pay much attention to what kind of form it is taking. So it ends up in a container that is created by joining many different spaces to one another, and whatever evolves is accepted as a form. This is a purely additive process. Now, subtractive process is you first imagine about a form, like I want my building to look like this. And then whatever is not necessary, you try to remove to make it a subtractive process where things are removed from a mother form to create a subset of form as a. This also has its own limitations, and many times a lot of compromises are done when this kind of subtraction is done. So ideally, it should be combination of both. That is, you make additions, and while you are making addition, you also have in mind some kind of a final form, and it is carried out in iterations, like you add something, you remove something, and by addition and subtraction, you finally come out with some result, end result of a form that is very close to what you idealized initially as a concept. That's what is the process of design. So this process is usually in stages. Now, in a bigger office, it is well documented and properly followed because projects are big, and it's not a single designer, it's a team. So unless you are working in an environment where you are the only architect and you have one or two assistants who are just assisting you, you have to get into a system where there is a large team of 4 or 5 people and not an individual, and they have to design something. Maybe the project is so big that in between the team members change. Somebody leaves the team, somebody new joins the team. So a process of various stages, a sequence, which is thought about initially and documented later on as it is followed, is important. And it needs to be very well documented for the sake of continuity and also for the sake of monitoring as to whether you are taking all the actions which are required and everything is being done to the satisfaction of the requirement of the project. Now, such process is quite well defined in many offices, and is very objective in its approach and assures a certain kind of result. Now, these results may not be very extraordinary, but they at least guarantee that they are satisfying the basic needs which are found through the abstraction of the user or the client, while not compromising too much on architectural expression or form. Now, being a logical process, results from all the designers who follow the process, they are similar in nature and contents, though not the same. So even when many different offices follow similar logical process, their design expressions tend to be similar yet different. As against this, there is another kind of process which is used by individual also. What we talked about, as I was saying, when the authentic process is followed honestly, the success is assured. Now, in case of intuitive design, the other side of it is intuitive, where it's usually an individual who just believes in his own expression and then imagines something, and then something clicks to him that he should design it in this manner and comes out with a design. Now, this is highly individual. This cannot be team, because it is one individual which is imagining certain form, certain expression of space, certain arrangement of masses and voids, and comes out with the design. Now, because it is not following a particular pattern, it is very intuitive and flashed. The success cannot be guaranteed, and it can be accidental in the sense sometimes the building can become very good, or some people may like it very much, some people may not like it at all. And the success depends mostly on individual, because it is his own idea, his own experience of translating the idea into reality that matters into success of that design. So maybe a young architect sometimes accidentally be very successful, or sometimes it could be a total failure. But as he goes on and matures, maybe the chances of success are much more than chances of failure. So it depends on individual, his creativity, his maturity, and the process which he follows in his mind. So it has two parts, as we were discussing: a logical process, which is functional, easy to reason, and clear to explain. Whereas the other process, lastly, that we discussed, abstraction, that is intuitive, easy to philosophize and pronounce. The philosophy could be very easily put forth in magical abstraction because the intuition comes with certain philosophy at back of mind. Whereas in the logical process, philosophy takes a backseat. The most important thing is it must function, it must satisfy the needs of the users, and has to be therefore fairly successful in giving solution to the requirements. Now, with logic in subconscious, the tool of abstraction generally gives you the tectonic of design. How well you create the abstract of the requirements of the systems available, how the technology is available, and how therefore the form could be organized in a particular manner. This is following certain logic. And such logic then gives out a certain kind of design. Now, in this logical process, analogy, metaphor, graphic design, themes, typology, there are some tools of not form design, they are the tools to reach the logic and the concept on which the design is based. They are frequently used for abstraction. That is, you use these tools to come out with the logical process to be followed to arrive at a design which is expected to be successful. Now, as an extension to these tools, which are more mentally character, as I said, because they are leading to the abstraction, certain geometrical tools, now we are not talking about different tools, they are used in the process of design. And they help transform the abstract idea into spatial arrangement of forms. Now, these tools are something that we want to talk about today. And a few examples that we will discuss today. One is symmetry, which is very common, yet now kind of out of fashion for no reason. Regulating lines is something which is long forgotten, which people have started rediscovering in recent times. Certain architects are doing it, but most of them are not aware about how the regulating line functions, or what is the function of regulating lines. Similarly, symmetry is looked at like, oh, that is a symmetrical design, as if designing in symmetry is something very easy. But abstracting a design into something which is minimalistic, symmetrical, and easy to understand is one of the most difficult processes of design. It is very easy to design a complex looking form or a complex looking structure if you have the right kind of technology and materials available. But it is very difficult to design a simple looking structure with minimum complexity in it, yet satisfying all the users' needs. So don't look at it as if this is something which is considered to be easy. When you start practicing, you will realize that all these three, symmetry, regulating lines, and proportions, and grid. Grid to nowadays, they say, oh my God, grid. Why do you design a grid? Is the often question asked. But at the same time, most of the great designers, they definitely follow grid or a system of arrangement of form and structure, which could be called grid. So now we will go into these tools and some of the examples of these tools. So first, symmetry. Symmetry is a spatial arrangement of objects and forms in a particular manner. It looks to be simplest and most common. One of the meaning of the word, which is a Greek word, is vague sense of harmonious and beautiful proportions and balance. So symmetry leads to balance, symmetry leads to harmony, and symmetry also leads to proportion. As simple as it appears, complex to design. Very common. Like, I think in the nature, you will find symmetry everywhere. All the trees or leaves, rather than trees, I would say leaves, and all the animals, they are symmetrical. Now, for the simple reason that they are not static, and only when you have symmetry, your movements and actions are logical and if that symmetry is not there in animals, their movement becomes very, very difficult. If this symmetry is not there in leaves, then the balance of tree may go out of balance and the tree may not survive for a long. So the entire nature uses symmetry, and therefore most in nature which are created by nature, except means the exceptions are like if you say a river, the river is not symmetrical, but the flow is symmetrical. The form of land may not be symmetrical, but there has to be a balance of hills and valleys. There cannot be just hills. There has to be valleys also to balance. So it is the idea of balance. Now balance appears soothing because we are symmetrical, because human beings are symmetrical. You cannot function if you are not symmetrical. Imagine if one of your hands is shorter, one of your leg is shorter, you won't be able to perform all the functions very efficiently. Such a person who has this kind of imbalance in the body finds it tough to live everyday life. So that balance, that symmetry is essential. Now, in architecture, this symmetry is expressed geometrically into how you transform the space into arrangement of forms and what principles of balance you use to achieve that symmetry. Now, there are three very common: scaling, reflection, and rotation. Scaling means you go on increasing or reducing the scale. Reflection, we will see, like this balance that you are saying, that balance is perfectly symmetrical. It's a reflection along an axis, that something which is on the left hand side of the axis is symmetrically reflected on the right hand side to achieve that symmetry and balance. And rotation, we will look into it as we go ahead. So symmetry signifies balance, and because we are all balanced and symmetrical, intuitively it appears soothing. Second thing is, when there is a symmetry, there is an order. And when there is an order, you understand the things quickly. When you look at anything symmetrical, you understand it quickly because you have to see only part of it. The other side is repetition. If it is a balance reflection, one side and the other side, they're exactly same. So your brain has to only analyze half part of it, and it knows that rest of the half is just reflection, so identical. So it takes much less time to understand that thing, and that's why it appears soothing. You quickly understand and you are comfortable. If you don't understand it quickly, you are not comfortable till the time you understand the whole arrangement. And that's why it is soothing. So in symmetry, commonly used different types are reflection, which may be unilateral or bilateral. Point reflection, that is, instead of a reflection along an axis or a line, if it is along a point, it is a point reflection or involutive symmetry. Then it could be rotational. We will look at the examples. It could be a combination of rotation and reflection. It could be a glide, in the sense appears sequentially in a manner. Or it could be helical, that is in 3 dimensions it is working. Usually in architecture, we commonly restrict it to reflection and rotation. Other forms are less used. Helical is used in sculpture very much, but not really in architecture so much. Some examples now we will look at. Most simple thing is reflection in terms of symmetry. Most of the buildings of classical times, you will find they are symmetrical along the axis. Say, for example, this is Pantheon in Rome. Now, this building, because of its structural system, because of the way the symmetry and structure go hand in hand and used, has survived more than 2000 years. Same symmetry is seen in many other cultures. For example, in Hindu temple, it is symmetrical because temple is considered to be body. It is derived from a body of a person. or man. So it has to be symmetrical. So it is symmetrical along the axis. Mosques are also symmetrical. And why they are symmetrical, both temple and mosque? Because there is one place where you want to concentrate for the prayers. They are all places for prayers, and there is one place, for example, in a temple, that's the deity. In mosque, it is a mihrab and a maksura wall. So you have to concentrate at that place. So to get importance to that place, taking that as an axis, on both sides the things are symmetrical. Now, is it only restricted to history? No. Later on also means, if you see the Greek history, the temples are symmetrical. This is Parthenon. If you see the Renaissance, the complete arrangement of this plaza at Vatican is symmetrical. The same thing you will see in New Delhi. The big mosque of Delhi, Jama Masjid, is symmetrical. The complete arrangement of Hindu temple in terms of the axis, in terms of the Garbhagruha, the Natamandapa and Jagmohan, Gopuram, all is symmetrical. In churches also, symmetry plays a very important role. That symmetry tells you that in the center is the main door. If this is not symmetrical, you have to find out where exactly the main door is. So very commonly used in European architecture. In New Delhi, same symmetry is used to emphasize the Rashtrapati Bhavan, as you see it here. Because the both sides are symmetrical, that gets the importance. The same thing happens in temple. Because both sides are symmetrical, the deity gets the importance. Even later on, let's say this is Larkin building by Frank Lloyd Wright. It is symmetrical along this axis and kind of symmetrical along this axis. This is not exactly symmetrical along the other axis because there is an offshoot on one side. But when you look at the building from one side, it appears symmetrical. But when you just move a little, it doesn't appear symmetrical. Still, the arrangement is symmetrical. Here, this is a departure from traditional historical way of using symmetry to modern way of using symmetry. Here you use it to arrange the forms, but that may not be the expression of the building in terms of aesthetics. So aesthetical expression may be asymmetrical, but the arrangement is symmetrical. This is the example of that building. Same with this Unity Church. It is symmetrical along axis, but you don't approach or see the building from that axis, so the building doesn't appear symmetrical to you, even when it is symmetrical. Even Louis Kahn used symmetry very much. If you go to even IIM Ahmedabad, you will see that the arrangement of forms is quite symmetrical. Here, it is exactly symmetrical. This is Salk Institute. This is very famous, and this is where he came out with the theory of master spaces and servant spaces. This is that complex. So this is exactly symmetrical, and therefore giving a clear importance to the surroundings. Actually, this photo is from the other side. You get onto the plaza and look the other way around. You look at the sea. So while you are on that plaza, you constantly see in the background, and this arrangement of symmetry actually enhances the vision of sea from this plaza. Mies van der Rohe, another modernist, he also uses symmetry very clearly in this building, Crown Hall. Of course, he has used and designed some very asymmetrical buildings, like the Barcelona Pavilion was absolutely asymmetrical. But there the importance was different. The importance was for the movement through that space. Here, this is an institute, and therefore the importance is to the appearance and approach to the institute, and therefore it's absolutely symmetrical. This is the Parliament House of Australia in Canberra. Quite a modern building, yet very symmetrical in look. So not that symmetry is shunned by modern architects. Even modern architects use symmetry for the benefit of getting a particular arrangement of forms that will impress people. We'll go further. This is Tadao Ando's twin houses. Each house is asymmetrical, yet the arrangement is symmetrical. So your individual building may not be symmetrical, but the arrangement could be symmetrical. And even while it is symmetrical, the expression changes. One building has a totally different finish and material than the other building, but the form is constant. Here the building is not symmetrical, but it is made to appear symmetrical. Now this is Norman Foster. He is also using symmetry to impress on the importance of that particular structure. Mario Botta, I think one of the contemporary architects who used symmetry extensively is Mario Botta. You can see many of his buildings, most of them use symmetry in some manner or other to create a very unique expression of architecture. Look at this building. It is symmetrical, but the moment you move a little, you don't really actually realize that it is symmetrical. Look at these buildings also of Mario Botta. This is very much in India. And such a large building that you don't see whole building at one go. So very difficult to imagine that this is a very symmetrical building. Now that was reflection along one axis. Now there could be reflection along two axes. For example, this famous temple of Ranakpur. It has two axes and it is symmetrical along both the axes. Taj Mahal or Humayun's tomb. They are again symmetrical along both the axes. That is symmetrical along east-west as well as north-south axis. Villa Rotunda, one of the important examples of Renaissance, is again axes symmetrical around two axes. Jewish Community Center by Louis Kahn. Again, a very modern building, but symmetrical along two axes. So not that this was a fashion of history and not followed by modernists. Even modernists used it very much. But these days, people have forgotten it. Means if I go to colleges and schools, very few students try and use these tools now. And the reason is they get exhausted by the time they just create that bubble diagram and don't want to take any further, what you can say, any further effort to come out with a form for a building. That takes us to the rotational symmetry. Now these are two examples which will very clearly and easily tell you what rotational symmetry is all about. It is rotating one particular element or form in a manner that they create a cohesive arrangement of forms which are again symmetrical. These are some examples of rotational symmetry, again used by architects very much. See, these are the ideas. They have to be extracted to create the architectural expression out of it. In nature, it is also there. Like leaves which are symmetrical along one axis, the flowers could have rotational symmetry like this. And these are a few examples which are very commonly seen. This is the kind of geometry which is seen in the rotational symmetry. And if you abstract and transform this into a built form, they will also give a fantastic result while creating some kind of order. Now, this is actually an abstraction of a building complex, which is a rotational symmetry. I'm just showing you some examples of how the rotational symmetry evolves. Then we will go to the buildings. This is Parliament of India. This is the famous cellular jail in Andaman. It's a model of that jail, which uses that rotational symmetry, but not exactly symmetrical in all respects. This is one most famous building using rotational symmetry, I would say. Many of you might have identified this building. This is a School of Architecture at Yale University, designed by Paul Rudolph. Now this uses, if I can go back, I will just check if I can go back. I think I cannot go back. So the same pinwheel which was shown you previously is used, abstracted and used in arrangement of these forms to create this very unique building. I think something went wrong. We have to wait a little till the time it settles. I try to go back. Rotational symmetry was used by modernists in their buildings.
Tejas.
I think
Yes.
it's held up for a while. Let's see if it revives. Please bear with me because I think that computer has frozen.
Yes, sir. It's absolutely okay.
I think I will have to restart that presentation. Till the time it opens, if there are any questions on whatever we dealt with, we can deal with
Yeah.
that.
So there's one question. What is the relativity between a building character and material in design?
Traditionally, a material is associated semantically, means we associate a material with a particular arrangement of that material. That arrangement is something that we have seen traditionally. Now, when you come up with a scheme where it's not seen and something else is seen, for example, usually you don't see cantilevers with bricks. And therefore, it doesn't conform to what we look at.
Okay.
I don't know why it is something wrong with my computer. It looks like not responding at all.
Can you restart it again, sir?
I will do that. I
Yeah.
will do that. Please bear with me.
Yes, yes, sir.
By the time you can make an students to
Okay. By the time I would like to ask the students to keep their questions typed in the chat box. There's also another thing we would like to inform the students that a link would be shared on the on their WhatsApp number. It's regarding the feedback of this webinar, and you will have to fill up the form, which would be forwarded to you after this webinar. Students, please bear up and don't leave the meeting. We will be beginning in a short while.
Okay.
Stay joined.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you now.
काही प्रश्न असतील तर विचारा, म्हणजे मग त्याची उत्तर जोपर्यंत सुरू होत नाहीये.
हो हो. Students, you can keep your questions typed in the chat box. So can we take one of the questions, sir?
Yes.
How should we develop the concept with material while designing?
How should we?
How should we develop the concept with material while designing?
Material. See, usually the material comes with a few characters, like how the best arrangement of that material will be, what kind of texture it has, what kind of visual module it has, what kind of visual look it has. So all these together become the character of that material. And when you are trying to build a concept around with material as a central theme, then you have to take into account that particular character of that material. For example, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir.
So, for example, if you are using stone, then stone has a particular character in terms of its looks, in terms of how you can build with stone. If you have to make some spans using stone, how they will be done, what kind of joints between stone will be there in case of masonry. So all this together you have to keep in mind when you are coming up with a concept that I am going to use stone as the main material of my building and build everything around stone. Does it clarify? Or maybe if it is wood, the same thing applies, that how you can build with wood. There are ways how you can build with wood, and the ways are defined by one, workability of the wood, two, the way wood joins or two wooden components join with each other, and how you can span with wood, how you can build a wall using wood, how you can build a roof using wood. So there are structural systems, and each system of structure has its own visual appeal also. So if you take wood as a central theme, then you have to take care of this particular character of wood, which is a structural character, B, a visual character, and C, the limitations.
Right.
All these three you have to take care of, particularly when you are dealing with a particular material and use that as the concept for your design.
Right. There's another question. I have read some of your articles from Medium, and they are indeed thought-provoking. How can one approach a concept? I find it quite confusing at times.
See, concept is a central idea which is driving your design. So to arrive at a concept, you have to first analyze what are the aspirations of that particular design. Means what that design wants. Say, for example, if you want to build a resort by the sea, then maybe the most important part of your concept is that from every space in that resort, every important space in that resort, you should be able to look at the sea. Say, for example, from the room, from the restaurant, you have to look at the sea, not necessarily from the kitchen or from the washrooms, but then your whole arrangement of spaces, arrangement of rooms becomes in a manner or calls for a form which allows that view of the sea from every such space. So that becomes your main idea around which the complete design is arranged.
Right. There's one more question. So whether plan follows form, or should the form follow the plan?
Well, it cannot be plan or something. See, form is a three-dimensional thing.
Right.
Now, both have to complement each other. The three-dimensional form and the arrangement in plan or in section, they must complement each other to get the right results. It cannot be one follows another. It must appear that they have come together, not following each other.
Okay. The next question is, what are your observations towards designing a form?
Well, it's up to the architect or the person who is creating.
Okay.
So he can come out with the form. Usually these forms are inspired by something. There cannot be a form which is not inspired by anything. They are usually inspired by some object, inspired by something in nature, inspired by land form, inspired by something. So how do you abstract it and get it in is something that one has to look at.
Okay. Sir, are the tools which you have mentioned applicable to advanced architectural design?
Yes, very much. See, these are the tools for arrangement of forms and spaces. Now the next part, actually, what is I'm trying to still put up, the screen is still blank, but next part is how do you detail it out? The regulating line deal with detailing of form into arrangement which is visually appealing. So actually it is the arrangement which could be anything, but usually it is inspired by something.
Right. Okay. There's one question from one of our faculty, and she wants to know how should the students aspiring for architecture be driven into the process of design, because they are totally new to this field, and how do we drive them into this process?
See, design as we were seeing it, it's a process which is either logical or intuitive. Now, for a logical process, you go through a series of steps which are like, first you find out two things. One is, what are the physical and psychological requirements of a client in terms of what he wants the building to be used as. And second is, what is the context? So what is the site? Where is the location? What are the local materials available? So all these analysis lead to certain conclusion that what kind of building is required in terms of physical spaces. That is, so many square meters of this space, so many square meters of this space, etc., etc. Then there is something coming from the context, like this kind of microclimate is there, this kind of view is there from the side, this kind of view is there towards the side. Now, these are all logical analyses. Once you put forth the analysis and then try to create the spaces, that gives you the clue as to what kind of form this particular requirement could generate out of arrangement of spaces. So
Right.
this is the way it has to go step by step. And many times as it happens is you go logically following the steps, but still you are not happy with the form which is evolving. And then
Right.
suddenly at one point of time, it flashes you that if you make an arrangement in this manner, it will take care of the requirements. So that is the intuitive part of it. So there, usually the design is first part, it is logical and systematic progress of arrangement. And then once you understand the complete nuances of how and what, then it flashes to you that this particular arrangement of form would help you. So it's a dual process actually.
Okay. So I think more of hands-on could actually help you in this process.
See, the issue is mostly what I see is the students confine themselves to form only.
Right.
Sorry, plan only. And they don't look at the three-dimensional form or a section so easily. So when you start looking at three-dimensional form, then it becomes easier. But mostly what I find is many students get exhausted by the time they try and satisfy the physical needs of their design in terms of plan. And very few try to do it together, like plan and section and three dimension. When you do it together, then it becomes easier to really generate a good design. I'll also give you another example in this. Many of them are fascinated by using circular forms. And they look good in plan, but when it comes to three-dimensional appearance, maybe not all such forms which are using circles really look good. That they don't either understand or they don't give importance to, because they get carried away by that appearance in plan and forget about how exactly the building is going to look in three dimensions.
Yes.
For example, now whatever buildings I have shown, some buildings I have shown in plan just to explain the arrangement, but other buildings I have shown in three dimensions just to explain how exactly that particular arrangement looks like.
Yes. Right, sir.
It's starting up, but still not completely started.
It's still blank, sir?
No, it is not blank anymore, but it is not fully booted. Still some processes are going on.
Okay. So anything you would like to share, sir?
I'm waiting to share
I
that
think
part.
computer and slides are just a medium. You have a lot actually imbibed in you.
See, what is important in the process of design is the patience and working again and again on the things. And this is where many times students don't reach. Like they get bored or exhausted too early to reach
Yeah.
the logical conclusion in terms of arriving at a complete design. Now, how do you make it happen is something that the students must uh, practice and learn, that they should not stop halfway and go till the logical conclusion of design in terms of all aspects, that is the plan, section, the construction method, the etc. etc.
Okay.
Just a moment, I'm just trying to start now. how you are dealing with the new academic year? You have started online
Yeah,
classes.
we have actually begun with our online sessions, and the design assignments have been floated by the respective faculty to the respective years, and yeah, we are trying to cope up with this new system of teaching learning.
But how are you then dealing with the studios online? Lectures I can understand, like what I
Yeah.
am trying to deliver now. It's a kind of a one-way traffic that I am
Yeah, it's
speaking
a
and somebody
one-way
is listening.
traffic, but we are trying to make it more interactive by asking the students to on the videos and then sharing their drawings, the work they have all, I mean, the conceptual drawings, and we ask them to present in some cases. So it's just the beginning as of this time, this pandemic time. Is- are you able to share it, sir? Is it audible?
माझा कुठे आहे?
माहित नाही तुझं कुठे आहे.
पण येईना काही नाही.
तेजा.
हो यालाय आवाज तुमचा, म्यूट करा.
हा तेजस सर, हॅलो, माझा आवाज ऐकू येते ना?
हो सर, हो हो.
हा, काय प्रॉब्लेम नाही आहे माझ्या माहितीप्रमाणे, फक्त ते